Welcome to Powering Product Innovation, a podcast from Cognizant's Technology Business Unit, where we partner with industry experts to enable continued innovation in the technology industry.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Cognizant's podcast on powering product innovation. I'm Deborah Eastman, and I'll be your host today. And I'm fortunate to be joined by Scott Schulman, who is a director in our consulting organization. Scott specializes in FinOps. And so today we're going to explore how tech companies can use FinOps to reduce their costs, improve utilization, and optimize rates. So Scott, welcome.
Well, thanks, Deb. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit more about your role here at Cognizant.
I'm in the tech modernization group. My specialty is doing FinOps evangelism and running the FinOps pillar. It's also where we have a community of practice for FinOps. FinOps is comprised of cost savings opportunities, maturity in the cloud operating model, and transparency around what drives costs within cloud. So it's kind of exciting where it's a consultative role, and it is very well received by our clients who are using a lot of cloud across all the different cloud providers and are looking for insights on how to save money and to be more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, that's absolutely relevant to our tech clients. A lot of our customers are asking us about how to optimize their cloud costs. As we've moved more and more stuff to the cloud, it becomes really important to figure out how to manage the cost associated with that. So this particular podcast series is really targeted to help product organizations. So tell us about how FinOps is relevant to a product engineering organization.
Sure. So what we see is that for a product engineering company, there's a high dependence on cloud as part of the foundation of what they deliver. If you are a manufacturing, then your cost of goods and your raw goods would be what help facilitate building your product. And in this situation, we see a high dependence on the cloud and cloud resources as part of the product that they're delivering. And with that, there's this battle between working hard and fast to be effective and at the same time being a good financial steward. And we help to inform and educate on the balance between those because you don't want to slow down being successful in the business, but you also don't want to waste money in the process. But one takes trump over the other from a priority standpoint. And we believe that there's kind of a happy medium.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that a lot of product engineering organizations are so focused on how fast they can get products to market. So how do you find that balance between engineering a product that's going to be cost effective in the cloud and accelerating your time to market?
I think that one of the big advantages of the cloud compared to traditional on-premise is the ability to requisition equipment, workloads, capacity almost instantaneously. And at the same time, being able to trial and proof of concept and spike on workloads in order to test and iterate on those because you have an endless supply of equipment and piles of equipment to do test criterias. So you can have 6, 7, 8 instances to test variants within your development process and then delete them as soon as you're done, as opposed to having 6, 7, 8 piles of equipment that you purchased, and now you have those sitting on the shelf and being wasteful. So the ability to kind of scale on demand or to do innovation or innovative development at a very low cost, very quickly and rapidly be able to iterate from there is one of the greatest features of cloud computing.
Yeah, it really gives you a lot of flexibility, doesn't it?
Absolutely. With that kind of flexibility comes responsibility. And what we often see is that when I am extending to my engineers to be creative and innovative, I also am asking them to be fiscally responsible so that they're not being wasteful while they're trying to be creative. And that's a balance where the adage around shifting left, teaching engineers in the development process to appreciate that there is a cost with the convenience that they're getting is a constant challenge of organizations. And we typically call that shift left. We want to include fiscal responsibility or FinOps responsibility and understanding into the acceleration of their DevOps, SecOps development pipelines so that they have those conveniences at their fingertips, but they also appreciate that comes with responsibility.
That sounds like a change management challenge. How do companies navigate that change?
It's a culture change more so than a change management. Change management comes as a byproduct of it, but when you create the awareness, when you are doing the education, when it's a We call it the three-legged stool. When you have the business, technology, and finance in concert, instead of it being reactive, it's much more proactive. So an engineer is almost signaling ahead of time that there is an initiative that they are going to work on that could incur cost. And it makes finance aware of it, and it's aligned with the business objectives. And therefore, it isn't so much reactive like I turned on logs and I now have incurred expense that I was not planning. This way, I'm turning on the logs in response to a business need, and I'm forecasting that I'm going to spend or overspend in advance. And now I have full transparency throughout the business that I'm doing this in a much more proactive way.
So that's interesting because as an individual engineer, then you really need to be much more mindful of this cost perspective versus just the creativity of creating the code that's generating the product. So in your work with clients, do you find that they resist that or that's difficult?
To a certain extent, when they are not educated about the big picture and the value of what we're doing, they are a little bit resistant in the beginning. And then what ends up happening is that there's this kind of transitional shift where the creativity around how can I optimize the workload? How can I build in efficiencies? How can I use native capabilities that are equally as powerful but save money become fun or challenging as they are doing what they typically do. So it's just another nuance. And we also see gamifications and hackathons where engineering resources have the opportunity to be creative, not only in their design and their development and their coding, but in the implementation and the way that they've selected and used the resources that may have a financial or a sustainable benefit in parallel to delivering the value that they're trying to do.
That's really interesting because what you're doing is you're tapping into that creative energy in a different way, right? So not creating something new in terms of a feature or a new product capability, but really using that creativity to really optimize the way they design it. So very interesting way to connect those dots.
So there's an interesting paradigm, which is if I save money and I reinvest it into cloud consumption, then I'm raising the effective value for every dollar of cloud consumption that I spent. So if I am not mature, if I am not effective, I might be getting, say, 25 cents worth of value for a dollar's worth of spend. And if I was to take those savings and continue to put them into being more efficient and more effective in the cloud, conceivably, I can raise the value of that same dollar of consumption. And maybe I'm going to be $1 or $2 or $3 of value for that dollar of spend. And now I'm really tapping into the overall value of the cloud consumption. So there's this alignment, and it's often referred to as unit economics, which is for every dollar of cloud that I spend, what is the value or correlation to some business-centric metric so that I can correlate that? An example might be, I'm going to use cloud-based fax serving, and my cost to deliver faxes are X, and the number of faxes that I deliver are Y, so I'm able to understand the cost per fax. And if I did that on-prem with a fax machine and a hard line, it would have been this. And if I do it in the cloud, I can very clearly delineate what that cost per fax may be. And now I have intangibles like convenience and auto scalability and never getting a busy signal and unlimited phone numbers and a whole number of other varieties of values that may not be financially attributable, but I can absolutely see the intangible value of them. So when we talk value and value proposition, it really aligns with what the business drivers of an organization are so that they can achieve the greatest value out of this consumptive spend that they are investing in.
Funny that you use fax machines. I didn't know they existed anymore. I thought email replaced all of that.
And we see this in areas like healthcare where they're still very highly dependent on faxes. They've made it electronic and autonomous and in the cloud, and it has driven the cost down. But what's interesting is that with the endless availability of capacity based on demand, they can auto scale. And now they could go from what would be perceived as from 1 to 1,000 fax machines as needed, and then scale back down without having to physically buy 1,000 fax machines.
Interesting. How does this change the metrics? How do they think about metrics? Often my clients, when they're developing products, they're always talking about velocity and number of story points and those types of things. How do you factor this into the performance or organizational metrics?
So what ends up happening is that you have the ability to define metrics on a whole variety of thresholds, and some of them may be utilization, some of them may be costs, and some of them may be business drivers. So in the case that we were talking about with faxes, we're able to measure the velocity of the number of faxes and the frequency. And we're also able to see whether or not the cost to deliver a fax goes up and down as volume goes up. So if I have a day that I have an enrollment and a high volume of faxes, and based upon the equipment and the efficiency of it, compared to a static standalone fax machine with a phone line, I may be able to have my cost per fax go down as I have prepared for more volume in a shorter period of time. So if I turn on a workload and then I turn it off when it's idle and I turn it back on as it's needed, and I know what it's going to be needed because of the hours of enrollment, I can control those costs with metrics and be able to see visibly. And there's a philosophy that FinOps.org advocates called the Prius effect. And it's very similar to when initially we had electric cars and you would step on the gas and immediately get thrown back in the seat and go, well, if I step on the gas immediately, I get thrown into the seat. So maybe next time I'm going to gently step on the gas and not be thrown as far back. And that instantaneous feedback of information allows me to now make very quick and concise changes with my behavior based upon the input that I'm getting. So with the cloud and with metrics specifically, the feedback loop is so quick and the ability to make changes is so quick and so inexpensive comparative to on-prem that I can make business-centric changes based upon metrics and data that I'm receiving at a much faster pace. And I can be much more in tune with the business drivers and the circumstances around what's driving my business.
So you've given a great example around faxes and a healthcare agency or insurance company, but can you bring that down to a SaaS company? Do you have a parallel example you could give about how you would do this in a SaaS company?
So often with a SaaS company, they are providing services because they are built upon cloud. So, if you think about the velocity of customers or the tenet of how many customers can share a single resource until it hits a saturation point, I can auto scale on the fly. If you look at a GoToMeeting or a Zoom or a Teams, there is a saturated point of the number of participants and the number of calls per one server to deliver that call. And I can on the fly scale so that nobody ever gets I can't join your meeting because there wasn't enough capacity. So seamlessly, I can scale up and scale down, and it will do it automatically, or I can do it intentionally. And the impression that I get to my users or my customers is we're always open. We always have plenty of capacity. And we see this, especially during pandemic, where there was an unprecedented increase in certain consumption patterns, people working remotely, doing GoToMeetings, whatever the case would be. And the organizations had to figure out how to scale seamlessly so that they didn't lose customers and revenue from that initiative. So we see that in a SaaS environment. We also see that similar to a typical cloud consumer, SaaS services also want to watch the same kinds of information that we do when we're watching our consumption of cloud services. They want to know what the utilization is. They want to know what the spend is. They want to know what the top service is being consumed. They want to make sure that they have excess capacity. They want to have high availability and resiliency. So similar to what we typically see in a traditional CSP service provider, we see this similarly in a SaaS provider also.
Yeah, interesting. So many of our SaaS customers are working in a multi-cloud environment. Is there anything unique about a multi-cloud environment?
So in the realm of FinOps, multi-cloud brings greater advantages than a single cloud service provider. And the reason is that you have the ability to aggregate data across the cloud providers and be able to see information with a new metric or a new dimension. So if I have an application and it sprawls across multiple cloud providers, but I still have a reference or a tag for that application, I can now correlate and roll up the usage pattern of the application uniquely to one cloud service provider or horizontally across multiple cloud service providers to show fault tolerance, to show response time, to show cost, and a variety of other kinds of things. And more so, with each one of the cloud service providers having kind of their own way of presenting metrics and cost information, we're seeing things like the focus program from FinOps.org, where there's a normalization of utilization and cost information from the disparate cloud providers so that they can normalize the information back. So you can say, I want to see the compute for this application that sits across multiple cloud service providers and be able to get back one answer that says, okay, I've normalized it and here's your answer. Now, if you would like to see it by Amazon or by Azure, I can give you that detail also, but I can kind of seamlessly with one metric give it to you holistically across all of the cloud service providers.
Is that requiring new standards in cloud, or is it a third party that's aggregating that data?
So FinOps.org is a nonprofit organization that is serving the FinOps community. This is an initiative that they've brought to the cloud service providers, and most, if not all of them, are now participating in this new initiative to provide their own information in this common lexicon in order to be able to provide commonality and to make it easier for visibility and transparency of the information to the consumers of their cloud providers.
Okay, interesting. So you've talked about the ability to be very dynamic and flexible and the opportunity to optimize your costs, but talk a little bit more about improving utilization.
Sure. So what we see with utilization is kind of twofold. One is to get the best use out of your spend, and the other one is to get the greatest performance out of your spend. So in one case, if I have bought something, a number of VMs in advance, I want to make sure that I use all of them. Otherwise, I'm kind of leaving money on the table. If I am buying a workload and it is not properly sized, I'm underutilizing it and I'm overpaying for it. So I want to right size that to have it be as close to my peak usage and not too much over the top so that I'm wasting. But I want to have headroom should I need to burst in that realm without it scaling to N+1 of them. So if I am consistently running at 80%, I'm pretty close to where I need to be. But if I'm running at 20%, I'm leaving a lot of extra capacity that I'm not using. And that means that I'm overpaying. If I am buying a commitment for 100 virtual machines and I'm only using 60 of them consistently, I have 40 of them that unless I intentionally left them for some form of high availability, I'm leaving 40 extra too many. And maybe I only need 5 or 10% extra for the consumption. So I might be overbuying and being too aggressive in my contingency. And once again, overspending them unnecessarily.
So you're really optimizing all of your resources available to you and making sure that you're not overspending or underspending and using, as you said, utilizing those resources effectively.
Yeah, and often the overspending is due to I needed to move to the cloud quickly, and I just kind of moved. We've used the term lift and shift to get to the cloud, and I haven't had the opportunity yet to prioritize optimizing it or refactoring it to get the greatest value at the lowest cost using the features. So we often see that in an effort to reduce on-prem costs, an organization will quickly move to the cloud, and it gets there, but it isn't the most cost-effective way to do it. They've just accomplished one goal and created another problem at the same time.
So they haven't really architected for the cloud. They took an on-prem app and then just moved it's where it's located.
And often they have best intentions or they're in a migration strategy or there's a prioritization and they haven't gotten to it yet. And that's not wrong. It's just making sure that the business is aligned with their priorities and that if they are going to prioritize one kind of a workload over another to save money, that's a known factor. It's frustrating when they look up and they go, wow, we didn't know it was going to be this expensive or we were unaware of that. I'd much rather agree that they moved it there knowing that there was going to be a carry cost as opposed to I'm unaware of the extra cost. And to me, that becomes tech debt or an opportunity to be more mature or to be more refined in their cloud strategy.
So tech companies tend to be pretty savvy about this stuff. And I know you work with a number of tech companies. What do you see in terms of the current maturity of tech companies in using this approach?
I find it really interesting or an interesting paradigm when a tech company is not very mature, but it's by design. Their focus is on building their business and building their brand and building their product. And they're not focused on saving money because they're trying to get to market and they're trying to be efficient and effective in their product delivery. At the same time, there is an opportunity for them to be more mature But that typically comes with time after they've analyzed and identified what their pattern is. And in order to optimize, you kind of have to know where you're going and what your run rate looks like or your steady state looks like in order to be able to say that this is the baseline and my efficiency is going to be based on this baseline plus a little bit of additional capacity. So we often see that a hard charging tech company doesn't prioritize cost effectiveness and maturity initially, and it becomes a byproduct later on. Some of the more mature tech companies are those that build foundational policies and governance in the beginning while they're developing their product, because they're recognizing that when they get to scale, they're not going to have time to go back and refactor their policies and processes. And they want to kind of do them in flight and to be organized and effective while they're also building their business and their brand and their product.
So, what are some of those policies and governance that's necessary to do that right from the start?
So, a good example is orphan storage. I'm going to run a backup and I'm going to save it for a period of time. And I'm going to identify the importance of it. And I'm going to understand when it's okay to delete it. And if I don't understand when it's okay to delete it, and I don't appreciate how much every day of keeping it out there costs me, it very quickly can just become a cost that I'm unaware of. So if I have a strategy that says, I'm going to create a backup and I'm going to keep it for 7 days, and every day after 7 days, I'm going to have a review process for business significance, and that the cost is understood for every day of keeping it. Kind of like when you have a rental arrangement and you're beyond your rent and now you are paying by the day. It is more expensive, but it's an understood cost. Similar to this, you want to have awareness of the cost and the impact of it. You don't want to be unaware of the cost because you didn't have governance or policy.
Okay, interesting. So, how long does it take for companies to kind of build that foundation? If they haven't built it already and they've got to go through the change management, what does that process look like?
We see maturity go from, say, pre-crawl to run somewhere between 5 and 7 years.
Wow.
When we start talking to organizations, usually they're in their second or third year of being in the cloud, and they're starting to feel the pains of this. So they're not too far in that they can't start on their maturity improvement journey. But if we see the overall kind of timeline for an organization doing this maturity dance, it's around 6 or 7 years. But if they're more aware on the onset and they are now starting to enter the cloud, and they are aware that there's a maturity journey that they understand the implications of, they can be at a run state and be very effective along the way because they can be doing those things in parallel. And we often see that with IT leaders who have done this journey before and are joining an organization and now taking that organization to the cloud, where that experience allows them to say, I understand what maturity looks like. Let's start implementing it at the beginning, rather than it being an afterthought and starting to implement maturity in the middle of the journey.
So, to the extent that you have the opportunity to start from scratch, build the foundation now. Otherwise, you are going to be on a journey of transformation in the future.
Yes. And that's why Cognizant, when we offer our point of view and our expertise on FinOps, we're able to give use cases and advocacy around what we've seen with organizations at different verticals, as well as at the same kind of consumption patterns as others. And what's interesting about the cloud is that you don't have to necessarily benchmark it against your own industry in order to reap the rewards of knowledge. You can understand those that consume at the same pattern with the same kinds of problems, the same kind of services at a similar cloud service provider. So an $18 million a year cloud consumer, regardless of the industry, has some very similar patterns and challenges to another industry that's at that same kind of consumption from a spend pattern and the services that they're using. So we're able to evangelize not only in the sector, but also in a consumption pattern and correlate information that we've seen with other kinds of customers, like a card services to an insurance or a manufacturing to a BFS kind of organization, and give insights that are unique and not necessarily those aligned exclusively with their industry.
You can't talk technology these days without talking about AI and Gen AI. So, tell us about how that applies in the world of FinOps.
Sure. So we're seeing the introduction of AI to FinOps in a couple of different fashions. So we're seeing it as a accelerator for being able to extract information that's relevant to the FinOps operating model and the use cases. So, Azure has the new Copilot offering out there that does the convenience of saying in near English terms, I would like to understand what resource is being consumed the most, that's the most expensive, that has the highest value to my organization, that is associated with a certain billing scope, as an example. And it automates and intelligently pulls that information easier and faster, almost on demand. We also see that there is, with machine learning and AI, the ability to do modeling and forecasting, say, of my budgeting information and what my estimation is going to be for my costs within cloud. And I can now be even more accurate trying to get that variance down between my consumption and my estimated spend by intelligently using patterns and models in order to identify and to communicate that. We often see, with talking to some of our customers, that the ability to identify efficiency of using the cloud is a formula of the difference between what they plan to spend in the cloud and what they actually did. And that variance often becomes an indicator or a KPI for how efficient they're running in the cloud. There are a number of other metrics that they can use, but this is one that when we see that it's below 10%, they're pretty effective. And when the difference between what they think it's going to be and what it actually is greater than that, it tends to be that they don't really understand from a proactive stance how to forecast more accurately what their consumption is going to be. And when you're able to use AI or ML in order to help identify that, it goes to the effectiveness and efficiency of using the cloud.
Right. Well, we all know we're on an early part of the journey of AI, so I'm sure there'll be an ongoing evolution of how it's going to apply and help people in this particular area.
Absolutely. I believe that the AI and the machine learning initiatives are going to help reduce the number of people are needed to deliver the same work, freeing those people up to do different work and more important work. I think that as we start to see things that are recurring and repeatable processes and can be automated or can be done intelligently through I believe that it still allows the people who have to interact with individuals and to do the improvement of FinOps culture. It frees them up from that distraction to allow them to interact with the individuals much more genuinely and much more informationally.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the debate on how AI is going to impact jobs. And I think you nailed it, right? It's really going to free up people to do things that are probably more creative, more strategic, and give us an opportunity to do more with less.
Yeah, I actually believe, as we talked about earlier, that the savings that are generated from AI can be put back into improving the value of the cloud and bringing more people into the cloud service offering so that they can bring greater value to the organization. So they can be greater evangelists, or they can work within business units, or they can be embedded into product centric areas and bring that FinOps expertise and experience to the ground and right there where they're making these products and these offerings, and let the AI do some of the more mundane items that take people away from that right now. And that way we can create even greater value and at the same time bring more people into the organization, even though it might be initially perceived that bringing AI reduces headcount. I believe that AI just allows people to be freed up to bring other values and services to the organization.
Yeah, I agree completely. So we've talked about how FinOps helps to reduce costs, improve the utilization of your resources. And you also talked about how that will allow you to optimize rates. Is there more there to uncover in terms of rate optimization?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that rates are typically driven by a couple of different drivers. As volume goes up, then your rate should be able to go down, i.e., the more that you buy, the cheaper it should be. It gives you a negotiating power to be able to say, I am consuming more, or I plan to consume more, so I'd like to get a greater discount. But with the rate optimization comes another level. And a really smart man once told me that if you can't get more profit from your margin, you can get more effective profit by optimizing your cost. And now what happens is that in the cloud, you end up with what's called an effective savings rate. And what that is that's your contracted rate plus the blend of all the other areas that you can affect discounting in order to get a blended discounted rate. And what I mean by that is if hypothetically you're getting 15% contracted rate off of on-demand or list price from your cloud services. And now I buy a reserved instance in advance in order to get a greater discount. And now I can implement another kind of savings opportunity like a spot. And now I can shut down workloads when I'm not needing them and turn them on as I need them. All of those things blended together might get me as much as 30 or 40% effective discount over that small discount that I got in the beginning. So the effective discount is when I combine them all together, and it's how much am I really getting and how much savings. And I think that that is a combination of a variety of methods. And when those are put together, you get an effective saving rate that's even greater than your contracted rate.
Lots to think about here, Scott. I mean, there's a lot for companies to take on in terms of really optimizing around FinOps. If you were to give advice to a technology company that may be on that journey, what would be the three most important points you'd want to tell them?
Sure. So I believe that education is number one. And there's a variety of ways to get educated on FinOps so that you can appreciate what we've been talking about today and how it can be applied to your business. FinOps is very much like GAAP is to accounting. It is a framework and a set of standards, but it is adopted individually by each organization based on the culture and their appetite for consumption. But to understand it allows you to apply it so that it is useful within your organization and beneficial. The second thing is that I believe that there is as we talked about earlier, this transparency of a collaboration within the organization, the three-legged stool, a FinOps steering committee, a FinOps organization within, or at least an understanding of adopting FinOps as a culture is important. And at the basic tenet, as we talked about before, it is the business, finance, and technology working in unison. I believe that with that also comes full transparency around cost. It's understanding about utilization. It's understanding about the goals and objectives. It's understanding the business drivers and the value that the cloud can bring. And are the things that the engineer's doing supporting the business's goals? And if so, now I have a good alignment between technology supporting the needs of the business, not necessarily the technology folks doing it because it's fun or because this is what their job is. They need to be in harmony so that the technology is supporting the business initiatives and the business values so that the business gets value out of the investment of the cloud. And the cloud is then reaping those rewards and helping the business. And once again, driving down the cost and improving the value for every consumptive dollar of cloud that gets consumed.
Okay, so you mentioned education, transparency.
Then FinOps committee.
Okay.
And that culture gets established. And then making sure that the technology is supporting the business initiatives.
Great. Terrific. All right. Well, I know you and your team do a lot of work for Cognizant clients. How does Cognizant Consulting help companies on this journey?
So, Deb, that's a great question. The consulting arm of Cognizant works in concert with the other divisions of Cognizant that have products, tooling, capabilities, people, and technology points of view. The thing that we typically like to think is that in order to know how to solve a problem, you need to be aware of the options that you have at your disposal. And within tech modernization, we're able to give our partners and our customers visibility around the art of the possible. So we talk about what their pains are that are keeping them up at night. We share with them things like the topics that we've talked to today around how this initiative or AI or data governance or any of the other areas that we have points of view on can bring value to them. And then we help facilitate methodologies or proof of concepts or staffing improvements or technology tooling that solve those problems. And what we found is that when we do that, we're able to build on the successes of this partnership. So a win is rewarded with another opportunity to bring another win to that client. We help them as our partner, not as our customer. And with that, we're able to go ahead and to prove out that this partnership is bidirectional and that we get as much value from them as they do from us. And with that, then those relationships are fostered and well established. And it is not uncommon for us to have 10, 15, 20-year relationships with our clients that have been built on trust and with success over time.
Great. Well, there's nothing I love more than bringing additional value to our clients. So we appreciate the great work you guys do. And I appreciate you taking time with me today. It was great to talk to you. And I know this is a really important topic, and hopefully our listeners got a lot out of it. So thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Deb. This was fun. Appreciate it.
I want to say thank you to Scott Schulman for taking the time to join us on the show today. It was really interesting to get his perspective and his insights into this world of FinOps. I know this is an important topic for many of our technology clients, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from him and learning on some of the areas that we explored today. And of course, a big thank you to all of you out there listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm Deb Eastman, and this has been Powering Product Innovation from Cognizant.